Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
So Marcus, are you normal? Are you average? Are you usual? Do you fit into a nice, neat, square, well-defined box?
Probably not, and probably not many people do, even so they might pretend they do.
Yeah, and you know what? Neither do I. And of course, neither does our podcast. But I have been dealing with people all week long that only know how to deal with situations that are nice and neat and square and perfect. I am an American Brit expat in Portugal who is self employed and trying to get a mortgage, and I may as well have three heads and be from Mars. And that's what's going on with me. But enough about me, Marcus. Are we talking to somebody else today?
Yes, and I'll pick up right there where you stopped, Mr. Farm Boy, who's now into blockchain. Yes, so we're talking to Matt Casey today and his book, The Management Delusion.
The management
So it's quite
delusion.
interesting, and I think I tried to get in there somewhere and a bit harsher talk about the idea that we should get rid of tons of managers, and I didn't quite get into that, but we talked a bit about that. But what were your insights and takeaways from the interview?
Um, it was a very interesting conversation. I liked his idea that instead of having true collaboration, you pass decisions around. So in a group of five people, you let each one person make a decision. And then by default, when they have the authority, maybe they are more collaborative. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with them. That was an interesting approach. I'm not sure how it works out in the wild, but it was an interesting approach. And the other one was, and we hear it a lot, are we talking about managers or are we talking about leaders? And his view is don't get hung up on the semantics. There's a little bit of management that all leaders have to do and a lot of leading that all managers have to do. And they're not black and white. You know, the world is not black and white, it's gray. And so those are my two takeaways from today. What about you?
Yeah, so apart from the fact, and you mentioned that as one of the insights, sort of is the idea, yeah, the collaborative conversation that never gets to a point. But the second you actually, where he said, the second you apply responsibility to a decision, suddenly everyone agrees and disagrees on a totally different level. And so I actually quite like the idea that if we actually put responsibility quicker on people, might get quicker decisions and less people chipping in. But the main one for me was that, and he talked a little bit about a lot of leaders agreeing with him to say, okay, we can manage this differently, we can do it differently, that's all great. Let's not hyper or micromanage this here. But then in reality, they don't actually do it, right? So, and what he furthermore said is that just hiring a manager of a team who can actually do that and let people do their work doesn't work either if leadership doesn't support it. So leadership has to set the culture. Leadership has to be brave. And I liked it when he said, like, sometimes leader hire me to hire a little bit extra courage into the organization. So, leaders need to be a bit more courageous to let people do what they're good at. And there's plenty of research and examples showing that productivity goes up, people can go home in time, people will manage their time better if they are able to do what they're actually trained to do, rather than being pushed in a certain direction despite their expertise. So I quite like that. Bring out the leaders. Leaders need to take on the same new responsibility that some people in team need to take, and therefore,
And
let's do that.
and before we started recording, we were talking about how he has, he's currently homeless because he gave up his flat. He spent time in South Africa. He spent time in Egypt. I think there was at least two other countries that he'd been bouncing around. And so I think he was illustrating within his own personal life the way he embraces courage is, not absence of fear, but taking action in spite of fear, even in the middle of a pandemic. But rather than talking about going to another country, where should we go, Marcus?
I don't know. You tell me, Troy.
Let's go to the interview.
Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Matt Casey. Hello, Matt, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here.
So, as usual, we start from the top. Please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
Okay, so I mean, the questions do actually fit quite well together. So the book, I ended up writing it because I realised that probably most of my career, I ended up disagreeing with the entire career I'd had. I'd worked in management since I was like my mid-20s. Um, Ended up being that kind of go-to guy in every company for management theory, and this is how you're supposed to manage people. And got into management training. I'd had a bunch of terrible jobs when I was younger. I left school when I was 14, which gives you a whole load of experience of terrible managers pretty quickly. And for a long time, I built most of my career around this idea that work is terrible for a lot of people because the managers aren't good enough. So we have to make the managers better because otherwise work will be terrible for people. Um, and then the reason I wrote the book was I suddenly had this realization that we're never going to make enough people good at this. It's too difficult. So many people need to be managers. The innate the innate sort of personality traits that you need in order to be good at it. So few people have, and this just isn't going to work. Like the only way we can ever make work better for most people is to make it so managers really can't be in the way as much. That we don't need to be as good. That you don't need as many of them. Um, and I ended up completely shifting my focus of the way I was doing my work to instead of saying, oh, okay, how can I be a great manager or make other people be great managers, to just how can I make it so that we don't need to be here? How can we achieve the same things but without really doing as much work so that people can be better at it? And the book was sort of the result of me trying that stuff out and seeing what worked and what didn't.
Lovely. So, when you say that, it's interesting because there is other books around there that pick up on similar themes, and system theory or organizational theory around system X and system Y. One that says you need managers so people actually do the work, and others actually, and the other system saying actually people want to work and they want to do their thing, and managers, as you said, might be in the way. But we're running with the other classic one with a very top down and manager are required kind of system. And then there's books that talk heavily about self organization and self organized teams. So when you look at that, is that sort of the area where you're sitting? Is it when you say they're doing less and less? How far would you go with this then? Is it sort of that you're saying we want to actually get rid of managers or redistribution or repurposing? How
Yeah, I
would you
mean,
develop this?
it's strange. I think they still need to exist. I think the issue to me is that when we pick a manager, especially in functional teams, the manager gets picked by another manager, and then so if you're putting it, you put a manager in charge of your design team, for example. Every single designer now, that's their manager, regardless of how their personality fits with that person, regardless of whether this is the person they naturally like would have a relationship that they naturally look up to. That's just their manager. So from that point on in that company, designers now have to have that person, and that just makes no sense to me. But I don't go as far as to say that they should have this like flat structure. There are no managers; everyone just self organizes. But I think if you let people self organize, the natural managers do kind of emerge. When I put this in place the first time, there were managers that emerged. It wasn't necessarily their job title, but there were definitely people who were in charge of stuff. Like we had someone who, if I was going to say what her title was, she was something to do with company culture. It was like if you put it into another job role, you'd have said this is who's in charge of our culture, and she's like an HR person maybe. She actually works in QA, but if you didn't behave the way you were supposed to behave there, if you kind of broke, if you were trying to take advantage of the way the company worked, you can be damn sure she'd have called you out on it. She'd have been the person that did that, and she earned that right just from being who she was. Other people looked up to her. Other people respected her. She had an ability to talk to people, and they would listen. So I think those roles emerge in teams naturally, and I think the only reason they don't most of the time is because we put someone there and there's no vacuum. So if you say on the design team, this person's the design manager now, whether if they're not the best suited for that role, there's no space for whoever is the best suited for that role to move into it. So yeah, I think it's not so much that I'm saying there should be no structure. I think the structure can kind of form itself. People will pick their managers and usually do.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of, I remember having worked with some people in, well, some people in some organization that I won't name, but it was the usual thing where people were quite happy with their job, and the second they had to move into a management position, they didn't quite enjoy it because it wasn't quite there. So exactly as you said, it doesn't come natural to everyone. It's a tricky job at best, and
Yeah.
then you're getting picked by a manager instead of, as you said, naturally evolving. So are you therefore saying that we're best at trying to create a context within which these characteristics can naturally come up, or the right
Yeah,
person
I
will
think
come
so.
up naturally?
Yeah, I think so. And also it's not always the same person for everything. So I've noticed later in my career as I grew up and started to mature and accept that I wasn't just brilliant at everything. I realized that I'm a really good leader and manager for when stuff's going wrong. Like if I step into a team that it's not great, things aren't working well, the company's a bit of a mess. I'm great at fixing that to get it to a point where it's no longer a mess. I'm not a good manager for making it better than that. Like once it's good and fine and working, for that next step of okay, how do we make good great? I'm not that person. Um, and actually, there's different scenarios where I'm quite good. If people are panicking, I'm quite good. If people are calm and I'm not as good, I'm good at dealing with mess. The way I think if you don't have defined roles and defined sort of this is your leader in every circumstance, then actually you can have different leaders for different circumstances because people just naturally step forward. So I found that my attention would normally go to the things that weren't working. I'd step in there, fix the things that weren't working, and other people would step into, oh, we can make this better, and I could just move away. It wasn't that I was like this overlord of everything at all times. Um, but I think, yeah, what it comes down to is if you don't have the role, if you specifically say the role doesn't exist, um, you do leave this vacuum which people can step into, which takes a huge amount of bravery, and I understand why people don't do it. But I think it will always happen because I think people who want leaders will seek to find them, and people who want to lead will try and lead. So it kind of does just emerge in a group.
I got a couple of things to feed back on that. I've said for a long time about myself, I fix things and I start things. I don't run things.
Yeah,
There's a completely different set of skills for running things than for fixing things or from going to 0 to 1 and starting things.
exactly.
So I
Yeah,
definitely relate to that. You've used the word leader there a few times, and I was going to pull you up on that. A lot of people get wrapped up in the semantics
yeah,
of managers versus leaders. And there's a huge level of kind of cultural shift happening that we don't need managers.
yeah.
Managers are 20th century, managers are obsolete, leaders are what we need. Where do you fall in all of that? And what is the role of a manager versus the role of a leader in the management delusion?
Sure. So I remember I used to kind of obsess about that difference myself a bit, and then I think I realized if you try and do management or try and do leading, either one, the traditional way, I think it's all very well saying they're very different things, but the fact is they do impact each other. So you could be a great leader, but if we're asking you to do the management stuff and you mess that up, the people who would have followed you don't follow you because they're annoyed with you because you messed their performance review up, or you didn't deliver the feedback in the right way, or you messed up their pay review. So being bad at one role will impact your ability to do the other one. And if you're a great manager, but you don't have that sort of natural, if you're a great manager, it's not going to make people more like inspired by you in the leadership ways. They don't even help each other. Um, so yeah, I don't think it was really ever possible to separate those roles. I think because they do get in the way, even though they are different things. But I do think the management bit you can get rid of so the leaders emerge. So I think if you automate or you decentralize the management stuff, the leaders can then lead without having to mess it up by being bad at stuff. Because I'm actually a terrible manager. I used to say that. It's like I could do well at the job, even though I know all the theory. I don't execute it very well. I would consistently get that wrong. But I think I can make up for that by being I'm quite so I can inspire people, I guess, in certain situations. I think that makes up sometimes for being a bad manager. But I think just taking that bit off our plates and letting people self-manage, letting people self-organize, or giving us tools so that we don't have to spend all of our time and effort doing this management stuff. I think leaders can just emerge. But probably a shorter answer to the question is, I think the leaders are critically important. I think the managers less so.
Mm. And when we look at that, so we have leadership now added, and as you said, or as you say in particular in the beginning of the book, there's so many roles and responsibilities that managers are stuffed into today's manager roles
Yeah,
for one reason or another. One of the other aspects you mentioned is decision making. Right, decision making is, there will be another follow up questions around data on that, but decision makers as a single position has also become sort of a challenged idea in terms of, cross-disciplinary teams, listen to everyone, gather all the data, have a balanced view on
yeah,
what the problem is, look at Google's research on the best teams are not the ones with the strongest decision makers and the highest skills, they're actually the ones who communicate best, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of shift towards collaboration, which seems to potentially contradict a sole decision maker in a team. You talk a bit about decision making. Can you elaborate sort of how that works for you and what your views on that, please?
yeah. I mean, I think I might disagree with the idea that sole decision makers. My problem with collaboration is that when you hear it talked about, it's like we should bring in collaboration, and the best decisions are made in this great collaborative way. I agree, but don't we always mess it up? Because what I see actually happening is loads of people just get in a room and shout at each other and can't agree on anything and take ages about making a decision, and then there's no one who can just make the call. Like, so every decision takes an age, and I don't actually see them being right more often than someone just going, "Oh, I think we'll just do this." Like, it doesn't. It seems to me like we waste more time trying to get it right and then don't get it right more of the time. It's not to say that I don't believe theoretically it's better. I just think when it comes to the execution, most companies don't seem to get that collaboration right. A lot of the book came down to this idea of like, I understand what we're trying to do, but given the fact we keep failing, shouldn't we try and do something just a bit easier? So I think where I came down to was the idea that every decision should have a decision maker. So you make this decision. Like, you should be listening to other people, but this one's yours. Like, just make it when you're ready to make it. But we need to be genuinely way more open to the fact that it's fine to mess stuff up, because I think obviously that's not a new idea. Like, we should be fine making mistakes. I've been hearing that for decades. Just companies should just embrace that. But I think we say it a lot, but I haven't seen any real evidence of that being true. What actually happens is we say we're fine with it, and then the moment a mistake happens, there's a big inquisition as to how did that mistake happen? What can we do differently next time? How do we stop this mistake happening again? Instead of just recognizing it's like, oh yeah, the mistakes are part of it. Like, yeah, we made the mistake, that went wrong, that was fine. The reason it went wrong is because it was just quicker to go wrong sometimes. Um, so yeah, I think in a perfect world, collaboration would work really well. We'd be able to pull in the ideas of everyone else. We'd be able to compute that in a way that and everyone was able to communicate brilliantly and it not lead to conflict. But I just never ever see it. And I think aiming at something a bit more realistic is probably to say, tell you what, give everyone decisions to make sure that give them some at least a framework for making sure they can't cause too much hassle if they make the wrong one. Check in on where it's going. So that, to me, you have to come to a point, I think, where people are okay with being wrong afterwards instead of okay with being wrong. But like trying to stop themselves being wrong in the first place.
I used to call it kumbaya management,
Oh
because everyone had
yeah,
to sit in a circle and hold hands and sing kumbaya before they came to any kind of a conclusion or any kind of an answer.
yeah.
And it is a cultural thing to a certain degree. I think there are more consensus driven cultures and more kind of hierarchy, or authority driven cultures. Not every culture is Steve Jobs, kind of led. And we kind of have to accept that those are different. You can't escape the fact that there's a new generation of people coming into the workforce, millennials and Gen Z, and they have a completely different view about how things should be done. They seem to show up, roughly the day after they graduate from either high school or graduate from uni, and they assume to become vice president, senior vice
Yeah.
president, or put on the most important, powerful projects there ever are in the world. How do you communicate to those people that are entering the workforce with misset expectations?
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? So I'd like to believe I knew how to do that. To be honest, I suspect I'd probably be quite jarring to those people in the way I like work to be done. Um, yeah, really, to be honest, I think the honest approach would sort of work. Like, you just say to those people, like, "Here's the deal," like it's just outright saying that's your expectations are wrong. It would kind of make sense. Um, but yeah, I think there's a kind of disconnect actually in terms of what their expectations are, because all of the data says that they want more autonomy, right? And they want autonomy at work. Um, but also, I don't think they really want risk in the same way. It seems like actually making those decisions and then dealing with the fallout from them isn't something they would like either. So that's probably confusing in that sense. But to me, I think giving people the thing they ask for and explaining that there's consequences generally works. Um, and I think there was an interesting thing I found when I first moved to this idea of just, you know what, you can do whatever you want to do, which was I had a bunch of people that worked for me, not like closer to my age, in fairness, so possibly different with that generation, um, who pretty much challenged every decision I ever made. So I was like, I think and it's not even like I was making them. I think we should do this, led to 100 different reasons why it would go wrong and why we shouldn't do it and why we should do something else. Um, so I thought I was worried a bit when I first put this in place. They're just going to run off and do crazy stuff. The stuff they were asking to do before, maybe that didn't make a great deal of sense. But actually, the moment I said, "Oh, it's actually on you and it's your responsibility," all of a sudden my opinion mattered. All of a sudden, they actually wanted me to tell them, because they were like, "Oh, wait, hang on. If this goes wrong, it's going to be my fault." Okay, what do you think I should do? I'm like, "Oh, cool. Now I can tell you." But before, and I was like, "I think you should do this." So they're like, "Well, I can't believe you're making me do this. This is ridiculous." Um, I think the actual responsibility would probably shift. It shifts a lot of people's mindset. I think when people feel like they don't have the responsibility, they yell that they want it. But if you actually give it to them, they're a bit more open. It's much
Well, that
easier to.
sounds
Sorry, Karen.
yeah, that sounds quite that, and yeah, you talk about that. And again, it goes a bit into the self-organizing, but just letting people do the way they want to do it is again sounds like I think that's what everyone wants. Everyone would like to do that. And we have this classic old hierarchy thing where more likely people will tell you what to do. So you're quite pushing back on everything. The second you actually gain the responsibility, as you said, do you think that then that really fixes exactly that? So, but then it leads to kind of a distributed responsibility in a way, which
Yeah.
might be a good thing. And
So
might be
what
a
I
good thing because you're moving that from the managerial centralization, maybe. Sorry, you.
Yeah. So what I found with that was this idea of, let's say, the way if you taking a decision being made with the two different approaches. One was like a collaborative decision making with five different people. You have five different decisions to make, and you get this same committee to make the decisions, and they're all equally responsible for the outcome. Um,
Mhm.
I think if you put those five individual decisions into that, they're going to talk forever, argue forever, battle forever, and move really, really slowly. I think if alternatively, just even at random, if you said, okay, there's five decisions to make, each one of you is going to make one of them. Like, you're responsible for what happens, but talk to everyone else. Don't make a stupid decision. I think what you like, but you get final say. So you can talk to everyone here. Don't make a dumb one. But at the end of the day, we're going to do what you want to do. You're in charge. I think that all the same conversations happen. I think they're far more open. I think it's better because the person making it is going to put an effort in, but they also know when to shut it down. And I also think that there's this kind of mutually assured destruction that comes in. No, I'm not going to give you too much hassle on your decision, because actually I've got another one. I've got to make my one. So I'm hoping you're going to leave me alone a bit as well. Like, there's a bit more give and take, but not in the same thing. But I think at the moment with these decisions by committee, what happens is everyone dies on every hill. Like, the number of meetings I was in when I would just look at it, it's like, do we care about this? Like, I know we're arguing because it seems like the best, but aren't we arguing for we're doing nothing because we're all worried about this edge 1% that we're arguing about of potential results? And I think That's what the decision by committee does. And you can actually bypass it by just saying, this is, use the committee, but the decision is one person's, but not always the same person. You have to share it around, share each decision around. I found that worked to me far, far better. And when I say it's not obviously you're handing out the different decisions, it's just a really simple example. The way I shared goals and give anyone individual goals. So here are the company goals. Do stuff that helps us achieve those, that you think helps achieve those. Bring people in if they agree. And the moment someone's got that, so well, I said I was going to do this. This is the thing we're trying to do. This is my thing, and I make decisions about it. And then they talk to the people involved. They're open to it, and then they go. And if it helps, great. And if it doesn't, well, they messed up, and then we do something differently next time, maybe. Like, but the same process, but yeah, probably not the same thing.
So, what about managing the other direction? What about managing up?
Yeah.
How do you manage your bosses? And this comes to the other half of the other question that we started to ask you about decision making and everything being data driven. Everything's driven by something on a spreadsheet from
Yeah.
somebody in the CFO's office, and you can't put morale into a spreadsheet. You
No.
can't put employee happiness into a spreadsheet when you move the office out to White City. I mean,
Yeah. Exactly.
none of that actually works.
Yeah.
So in the middle of an organization, managing down, you've given us some good insights. How do you manage up?
So
And
I
how do you
think,
manage against data?
yeah. So I think that bit specifically is the bit that just has to go. Like I think that the times I've beaten myself up most as a manager are the things where I know that I'm trying to make sure I'm doing right by my staff. So I'm in charge of their pay rise. Like, and you've got this budget that I'm allocating around and sharing out around people, and I just thought this is insane. Like, you shouldn't manage up. There shouldn't be a need to manage up, because I think we need to take all of that away and say, here's the deal. You're in charge of your own happiness at work. You really are. So I don't think anyone should ever give you a pay rise. I think there should be someone you ask for. It's your job to say whether you should be paid more, and you should be able to go directly to HR and say, here's the deal. This is what I'm worth. This is why. Same with your working hours. You should be making those choices yourself. If you're not producing stuff, like if you're not in the office, other people should notice. I don't think you need a manager to do that. I don't think you should be asking permission pretty much for anything at work. So I don't think I think having the manager as a blocker for those things just doesn't work. Like the best we can be is not in the way. So yeah, I think taking them out of that process is what you need. You really do. Like I think I mentioned in the book that whenever you talk to someone who says that they love their manager, you always hear they let me do this, they let me do this, they let me do this. It's like, well, so they don't actually do anything. They just don't stop you doing something else. Like that's what a good manager normally does. So yeah, I think that upward management, the moment that's necessary, I think that's a mistake in the relationship. I have quite I don't know if it's hippie-ish, it's the word. I don't think it's healthy for anyone to have someone they have to ask permission for. I don't think it's good for us. I mean, it's good for the way we think. I think it's too easy for us to end up being stupid when someone else can give us permission to do things. And I think taking that away makes people happier, better at their job, and more likely to do well, more responsible. So I think the moment there is any need for upward management, I think whatever that is just needs to be taken out, and people should be responsible for it themselves.
And that then reminds me of, because again, there's just so many nice echoes with what other people have seen in self-managed teams where managers were really taken away or just became an enabling facility. And productivity numbers went up in a lot of those cases by basically people suddenly feeling very differently towards their job and being able to do what to do in their own pace, in their own way, but with the same results. Where companies scrapped overtime and they had no loss in productivity, the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Because people knew they could go home earlier, especially in these days, I think after more than a year of COVID, when you're at home and there's family and kids and whatnot, there's a lot of people who'd love to do that. I know it from friends who work in a cultural environment where it's looked down upon if you leave early, even if you've done your job, which makes no sense whatsoever. And people get stressed out about, like, I want to get home to my kids earlier because I'm actually done with my work today.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't I be doing? Then people kill time, do absolutely nothing for another hour, and then go home.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's a lot
exactly.
of that. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. The problem when you have it kind of taps into this data thing as well. I think the moment you have a manager, it's like even if the manager doesn't care, actually. Like, I remember being early in that role when I first moved into that role. I was always quite relaxed. I used to feel like maybe I would be judged by people senior to me because my team were leaving early. So I'm like, well, do I need to keep you here so that I don't look like I'm not doing my job? And you think these things it's just this sort of self-fulfilling madness where no one really agrees with it. You're just doing it because you feel like you're supposed to do it. And it does come down to this idea of the moment you're responsible for someone else and their behaviors, I think you're naturally going to create a problem there. Like, everyone should be responsible for that, how they behave at work and what they produce at work. And the moment you get to a state, I think, where someone else is going to be responsible for what someone else does, that's just a recipe for problems. I think you see it relentlessly. Of like, well, why does me managing a team that does well reflect well on me, really, if I don't do the work? And you can end up in a situation, I've been in it having had lots of bad managers. I have actively done a bad job before because I didn't like my manager and I hated the idea of him getting credit for me doing well. So I thought, if I do my job well, this guy is going to get credit for that. I hate that, so I'm going to do it badly. You think, well, that shouldn't even be possible. Like, if I do a bad job, the only person that should really suffer for that is me. But it wasn't. It would have been him. So the company overall suffered because I was petty, but lots of people are.
So, can I kind of bring us back to where you started?
Sure.
You started by saying, I'm good when things are a mess. I'm good when things are unclear. How do you deal with kind of teams and make them more comfortable with ambiguity and more comfortable with uncertainty? And I hate to say it, but we always have more questions than we have time. This is probably going to be the last question. So,
Okay.
throw in whatever additional thoughts you'd like to have at the end.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, to be honest, I would say the answer to that question is probably the biggest failure to date in my career in terms of being able to get people comfortable with it. And I must have had the same conversation with founders so many times, and it's infuriating. I tell them all of this stuff. They say they don't like hierarchy. I say, here's a way you can be this company that you think you want. They agree with everything and then don't do it. They stick to these rigid hierarchies because they're so comfortable with it. Getting people comfortable with it, the logic doesn't seem to be enough. And I think where I've come to is I think that's actually the role of the leaders. And I think that's actually probably the thing where I've historically, and I said, like, I'm good at some things. I think that's probably the one skill I have when I'm there that has allowed me to have a good career, which is that when people are going to do something, there's someone who can say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do it. I'm going to do it. Yep. It's just, I always said that people can outsource a bit of courage from me. And it's just because I'm optimistic. I'm like, yeah, if you do that, it'll probably work. Let's go. So yeah, my honest answer to it is I'm not really sure how to get people confident at that without them having someone who is. So maybe what teams need is a scattering of people who are like, yeah, that's fine, we can do that. But there's a problem there because if you're responsible for it, but someone else gave you permission, are you really just moving the blame over? But yeah, the truth is, I think that's probably the thing that gets in the way of us moving away from these structures that we all know don't work, is that we're all a bit scared of it actually being our responsibility. And it's nicer when you can share the blame out to a bunch of other people or to one other person. So yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Marcus, any last comments?
Yeah, I think just to say that, just pick up on what you literally just said. So I think there's a lot of fear out there. And the idea of hiring a little bit of more courage into the organization, I think that is what probably a lot of organizations should really rather do. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for your insights, and thank you for being with us.
Great. Thanks a lot. It's great chatting to you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.